Firstly, I'd like to welcome you to the free online training course from Sinnaps. This is our first tutorial and it is mainly focused on how to plan a project. These are the matters we'll touch on over the next 20 minutes. The default setting for our calendar is always blank when we create a project. So, the very first thing we need to do is to design the specifications for our planning schedule. These may change at any time during the project, but they need to be done well from the get-go. So, we need to head to the bottom of the planning area. Here, we click on the project summary icon. It drops down, and we have a series of properties we can edit. We can include the project name we want. We can also say if we want weekends included in the project, and we can give a start date. If our project started several months or a few weeks ago, we can put that here. You can also plan around a finish date, though this is a little more complicated. We'll look at that more in depth in a future lesson. We can also set the time slot for the project. This option is very interesting when members of the project are working in different places around the world. Then everybody receives the alarms and warnings based on the same time slot. This is very important when setting milestones and delivery dates. Lastly, we can decide which currency to work in from here. Now that we have project specifications, it's important to mark notable dates or milestones on the calendar. These are things outside the project, happening independently of it, but which have an impact on planning. For example, if we have a specific project delivery date, or someone is on holiday, or there is an important presentation, or we want to highlight specific date because some suppliers are coming, or there is a deadline we have to set to check something. For these things, we choose the date we want to highlight. Here, we add in the text to describe the event. Then, we can choose a colour or texture. It is important to use the same colour or texture for an event type. That way, it's easier to identify them. Once we have set the specifications and key dates, we can start to create activities in different ways. The first and most obvious is by clicking on the Create Activity symbol. The default setting for Sinnaps is to create activities as soon as possible. As this activity has no dependency, it will be placed at the start of the project. When we create an activity, the activity panel on the right will drop down automatically. This panel lets us edit the properties of any activity. To start with, however, I recommend you choose a short, descriptive name that everyone can easily understand. Then, create subtasks which lay out the work to be done for this activity. This will be very helpful when it comes to establishing activity flow. These are the only things that I would focus on at this stage. When we have a more detailed activity flow, we can examine the details. With the activity created, we can drag it using the mouse and drop it on the desired date. On creation, they are normally assigned a week's duration, but we can extend them to cover the period we require. Here, we can see we've dragged the activity to a specific date. What that means is, we've just given it a time dependency. To eliminate this dependency, we remove it from over here. As I mentioned before, Sinnaps always tries to assign it the optimum place, and by eliminating the dependencies, it returns the activity to as soon as possible. Another way to create activities involves dragging the icon to the date we want. Sinnaps is going to create an activity with a dependency on this date. This is more practical when we have a lengthy project. The start is no longer in sight, so we don't want the activity disappearing each time it's created. Or we simply have the date we want for the activity in front of us. If we zoom in, we can see the default settings on Sinnaps only gives us a few months after the last activity. If we want to have an activity that is further into the future, then we need to go to the activity panel. click on the calendar icon and choose the desired date. Obviously, the date chosen must be after the start date. At Sinnaps, we always recommend planning a project with dependencies. This enables your planning to adapt in a more realistic fashion to any changes. If we plan around some set dates, these dates are not going to respect the dependencies when changes are made to the project. That's why it's always better to plan using dependencies. We can create dependencies in different ways for this. For example, we have 3 activities without dependencies. Let's say that for activity 2 to begin, number 1 needs to have finished. We click on the activity we want to work on. In this case, that's number 2. When the activity panel drops down, we can click on the icon of the activity which it will depend on. The system automatically places one ahead of the other. What will happen? See here. The first thing that happens is whenever we modify this activity, the dependency is respected. Another way to create dependencies is by using the activity panel. For example, if we want to make activity 3 depend on 2, we come here, click on the dependency symbol and, you see, here is a list of all the dependencies that are possible. So, we select them and they are created. This way of creating dependencies is more useful for complex projects with many activities when we don't know where to put them. It means we don't have to go searching for activities one by one. Although we don't know where we have to put an activity when we create one, all we need to do is find the dependency and the app puts them into their assigned place. Each activity can have a maximum of 5 dependencies. In this case, we can make it depend on the 2. So, what this means is that activity 3 can never take place before activities 2 or 1. An activity can have as many time dependencies as activity dependencies. In other words, if activity 3 has to happen on that day because there is a firm date for a milestone, then what we do is to put it on that day and create this time dependency. So now we have 2 dependencies. We have a time dependency and an activity dependency. You can see that when we click on an activity, Sinnaps shows a grey area and a white area on the calendar. The white shows us where on the calendar the activity can be positioned. If we try to put the activity in the grey area, we'll see that that isn't possible. This means that there is a dependency there which won't allow it. In this case, we can see this activity depends on that one, but also on this other. What's more, we can see that there is a forbidden symbol attached to this activity. This tells us that the date-based dependency for this activity needs to be moved further left. It affects both the following activity and all those later depending on them. For example, activity 2, in this case, it has a prior activity on which it depends with a set date. We can see it also has a later activity depending on it, and that also has a set date. In this case, the activity can't move further to the right of 3 nor to the left of 1. This is what's known as activity clearance and helps us ensure that planning keeps in line with reality. We can come here, remove the set date, and the activity will be shifted to as soon as possible. Now, let's go back to the previous activity. The activity clearance is no longer limited to the right, as there is now no activity that has a later time dependency. Just as we can create activities by dragging the plus to a specific date, so we can create activities with dependencies. In other words, imagine we want to create an activity that depends on activity 5. So we can drag the plus and place it on the dependency symbol for Activity 5. Doing this makes the size of the symbol change, which tells us that if we let go with the mouse, it's going to create an activity that is directly dependent on Activity 5. This way, we can interlink all activities we want and very quickly generate our planning schedule. When our planning starts to take shape, we see that the activities start changing colour automatically. As the days go by, Sinnaps shows the activities in 4 different colours. White shows those which haven't started yet. Orange reveals those that should be ongoing per the schedule. Green is for those activities which have been validated. Lastly, the activities in red are those which, according to the planning, should have been validated but no one has done so at this point. Thus, it has become a risk for our project. When we are laying out the planning for our project, this is the time to round out activities. So, we can enter an activity and start defining the details more in depth. The good thing about a tool like Sinnaps is that it allows you to adjust the schedule for your project as it evolves. This means you don't have to worry about having everything right from the get-go. Assuredly, you'll have to make changes later. As the number of activities in your project grows, so the planning for it will grow to resemble this. Planning in Sinnaps can be viewed in 2 ways: critical path or classic Gantt chart. The Gantt chart shows us the traditional wave of activities with a clear timeline. CPM or critical path sees Sinnaps group all the activities at the top. This makes it far easier to view while providing us with far more information. Why does it do this? Well, what's going on is that Sinnaps is calculating the duration of the activities, the set dates for the project, and the dependencies among all the activities to calculate the critical path for our project. The critical path is simply the achievement of those activities which delineate the minimum duration of our project. This is very interesting as it reveals bottlenecks in the project when it comes to assigning resources and prioritising activities. It also clearly shows us which activities need to be prioritised if we don't want our project to experience delays. This doesn't mean the contents of the activity are more or less important, rather that, mathematically speaking, there is no other combination of activities that could speed up the project. This is useful as it tells us that if I alter any of the activities above, the changes will directly affect the final activity and so extend the length of the project. What's more, the calculation is done for each activity, so when we alter the duration or dependencies of this activity, it won't have an impact on project time. However, changing the activity closest to the critical path will have a knock-on effect. When you start to plan your project, remember you can access the virtual coach from this tab. The coach is a Sinnaps tool that is only available to PMs and it's there to help you. It analyses 300 planning parameters and based on these, it provides a series of recommendations on how to improve your planning. It warns you if problems have been detected, while telling you if you're doing things well. Meanwhile, if you're having trouble implementing Sinnaps with your team, here you can help some tips we've seen work really well with other companies. Remember to consult the coach from time to time. This is a very powerful tool and, especially at the start, it can really help you a lot. The Sinnaps Overview panel is a compilation of all your projects on a single screen. It is unique to each user and generated each time you access Sinnaps. In other words, Sinnaps gathers together all the projects you've been working on here. It automatically groups and prioritises all the activities based on validation status and planning for each project. Activities still to be done, those in progress and those delayed. It places activities with least delay at the bottom and those with the most at the top. Equally, we can see that the activities are organised here based on the days remaining for completion, or until starting for activities that have not yet begun. This means that we have the activities which require working on and their priority at our fingertips. Let us say that it prioritises activities automatically for each user. On the left, we have a menu for the Overview panel. From here, we can decide to view all projects or just some of them, to see all the activities or just some of them, and if we wish to see the activities for everyone or just those for the projects in which we are involved. On the right, we have the Social wall, which details all the things going on in our projects. Here we can check what's happened since the last time we logged in and in what order. In other words, whenever one of the users in one of your projects does something relevant, the details are recorded, and we can interact on top of our colleagues' work. We can make a comment, or tell them that we don't like or are concerned about something. It's good to be able to interact on other people's work and show you've seen it or you're aware of the latest changes. And that is where we bring this first lesson to a close. I recommend you start to plan fearlessly, and if you like what you saw, see you next time when we'll be looking at how to manage a team and control project expenses and resources. Remember, you can access our help desk from here and obtain any information you need on how to use Sinnaps. You can also find lots of tutorials on YouTube. Read the articles on our blog to catch up with everything going on at Sinnaps. See you next time.